slides worth, I think. So I retired 20 years ago, as you said, and I wanted to get involved in conservation work. And I decided that with very few people around here looking after the conservation of plants, those looking after birds and things like that, raptors, badgers and stuff, with very few people dealing with plants. And so I set out to set up a small group of people who would monitor plants locally. Can you hear, Roger?
Yes, thank you.
I wanted to get together a small group of people who would monitor local rare and unusual plant sites, really. I was nowhere near as successful at doing that as my wife was, who went in to look at safeguard wildlife in the planning system. It's her contribution to conservation. And she formed a group which is still doing very well and active. My group's gone downhill since the start of these things. But it was hard to find people. Can I have the first slide? Here you see a group of them. In fact, Pam is here today. Is she in the audience somewhere? I can't see her, but she was here earlier on. I managed to get a small group of people, but I was flooded with places that people thought wanted conserving. For instance, SNH gave me a file of sites which they'd visited and felt that they needed conserving and maintaining, and they just hadn't got time to do it. Similarly, there's a guy who you'll see the influence of his contribution. His hobby was going around lime workings. When you spread lime on the ground, farmers do this, it's fertilizer. And so you get, if you spread it on wild countryside, you get lots of lovely plants. And some of the sites I'll show you today come from. And there are other ways in which we found sites. This is an example. Here, the owners of this quarry, which is near Camas Barron, I wanted to reopen the quarry, and we were asked if we would go in and see if there was any important wildlife in the site. I don't think there were many plants, but there were peregrine falcons and things like that. So here they are. Now, what has conserving plants got to do with quarries and mining, which is the subject today, of course? Well, out of about the 30 sites that we visit, about half of them are actually old mine tips and quarries. So I made a list of them here, and you can see that some of them are SSSI, some are country parks, some are local nature conservation sites, which means that other people think they're important for the plants that they have on them. Next one. So I thought I'd address the question at the beginning: why do mineral workings feature so prominently in our rare and interesting plant sites? Well, the first thing is rather obvious, that if you quarry material from under the earth and bring it up to the surface, you create absolutely new habitats. And these habitats sometimes can be detrimental to plants. They might have heavy metals in them, like lead and copper and silver and gold, all these things that we've been hearing about, and that suppresses the growth of most plants. And it's only a few rather specialised plants that survive on them. And then there's the converse to that, that if you are digging up lime, for instance, and the soils around the site are impoverished, as they usually are, the lime improves the site, and you get the growth of all sorts of other things. For instance, most of our wildflower meadows are actually around lime mining sites. However, this isn't the whole story. Somebody touched on this earlier on today. Another feature of spoil heaps is that they're dangerous places. They're usually surrounded by fences. You can see there are actually buildings in here to keep people out. And when they're worked out, are no longer used, they're basically abandoned to nature. And we don't have enough places in Britain abandoned to nature. And you do tend to get different sorts of places which are truly abandoned to nature with different plants on them. Now, the last reason why there might be so many more of them than you might expect is that there are a hell of a lot of mineral extraction sites. Every village has got places where it's quarried stone and things. I asked Roger, who's I know going around all the quarries in Dollar, how many he'd been to. And there are 12 quarries he's been to at the moment just in Dollar. You can imagine how many there are around Stirling. So the other reason that there are lots of these sites with interesting plants on them is because there are a large number of such sites altogether. Next one, please. Oh, wait, okay.
No, that's all right. I can go back.
Don't worry, stay there.
Okay.
The first, one of the first sites we went as a group to help at was a place called Almond Bay. Here it is. And we went there because there's a nationally rare orchid there. In fact, it only grows in Britain, which is what makes it even more important. And it's called Young's Helleborine. Well, helleborines are a type of robust orchids. So blue flags that you see on these maps, and there'll be lots of them, actually show all the sites where there's a plant. So there are lots of plants on this particular bin. It's on the Forth and Clyde Canal, which is going from Falkirk up there to Linlithgow down here. And this is the aqueduct which takes it over the River Avon. Now, I thought originally that this was a coal bin. And it is true, there is a big colliery here. This is Muiravenside Country Park, and there is a Muiravenside colliery in this area. In fact, this church here, which is Muiravenside Church, has this wonderful pictorial gravestone. Somebody just now was talking about driving wedges into rock faces. Here's the miner with his hammer driving in the wedges here. And I can see this on the front of the next journal editor. I really like that. Here's the man and his wife. Anyway, it transpires when I was researching this talk that the almond bee is probably not a coal bin, because right next door to it, just here, is a huge works for making fire clay bricks, the bricks which line furnaces. Of course, they're made from clay. So this bin is the result of the dumping of clay which wasn't right for the job of making bricks. They used to dump it just here. Okay, here's a picture of the manual brickworks, the next one. Well, a strange site actually. Originally there was an iron foundry here, but they found a clay seam here which had enough alumina in it to make fire. The ceramic bricks, these refractory bricks, and it grew up into a huge work. And they had mines all over the place, but right in the middle of it was this 15th century almond castle, which links it to the almond tip. Okay, well, it's supposed to be about plants, but I do find the geology really interesting. In fact, in its latter days, they used to ship, apparently, fire clay in to here. So our tip is actually made of a whole mixture of different clay types. It was Jeff Bailey, the local archaeologist, who told me all about this. Next slide, please. So here are two helleborines. This is a common helleborine. It's not that common. It's a really robust plant. As you can see here, it might be waist high on me. Now, I call it common, and it is It's not that common, but it grows in the second quadrangle down there. God knows how it got there. But this is relatively common anyway. But with it is a much smaller type of helleborine, which Sue Cooper of Plant Life is trying to look at it. Now this is supposed to be another species. I was never very sure of this, but you could tell the two apart. The next one. So here are some of the features. This P.D. Wally, a P.D. Wally epicactus, as I call it, that's a Latin name for it, or helleborine, was originally found in Northumberland on lead mine tips. Then it was found at Blantyre in Scotland on a coal tip, and then on this almond bean. The Filson bean is just down the canal from it, another place. Now it has a number of rather difficult features which allow one to distinguish it from its common cousin. It has leaves, for instance, in two ranks. It has curving, wavy margins on the leaves and things like that. But I found it very difficult to use these criteria. If you find one of the common helleborines growing on a bad patch of soil, it begins to look like this. Anyway, it was very important because it was classified as a new British endemic species. That means it's only found in Britain in 1982. And as such, it was given red data book status and legal protection under Schedule 8 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. Now, this has important implications in the planning process. Believe it or not, people buy bean sites either to dump more stuff into them or to use the spoil that's in them for something like building up embankments. And all that had to stop because it was under the Schedule 8, on the Schedule 8 list. Now, there were plenty of botanists who could tell this species from the other one. I'm afraid I wasn't one of them. But taxonomists were given new tools in the 1990s where they could use DNA sequences and isozyme patterns, as they're called, in order to distinguish different species. Now, if this really was a new species, then one would expect the plants in Northumberland and Lanark, etc., to share the same DNA profiles as the ones on the bean, the almond bean. But that turned out not quite as clear as that. And similarly, you would not expect these to have genes in common with the common helleborine. And that wasn't that clear either. So basically, the Joint Nature Conservancy Council got cold feet about this. They could visualize that there was going to be a legal case where somebody who wanted to exploit one of these beings would actually bring an action for the Nature Conservancy to prove that this was a new species. And I think they knew they couldn't do that. Mm-hmm. So the JNCC, in a review of Schedule 8 listing, recommend the removal of this plant as a separate species, and they regarded it as a variety. So it's still there, and it's still being looked at, but in this case, the development of a canal basin for residential boats on the canal was allowed to go ahead. Next slide, please. Now, there are, of course, proper coal bins around. This is Plain Country Park, and there's no doubt about the nature of the spoils here. It's got this sculpture out in front of it. However, when I went round and read the information boards, which were very good, I found out that originally this area was quarried for sandstone. And the sandstone was used to build for some of the important buildings in Stirling, like the library and the central post office, and also some in Falkirk. And actually, I can't believe this, but also the Bash Rock Lighthouse. Doesn't seem the right sort of rock to build that up. I wouldn't have a granite lighthouse myself. But anyway, when these quarries were finished with, the coal board bought them and filled them up with coal spoil. Next slide. Now, the reason that we knew much about this was that it was owned by Stirling Council and they wanted to develop the site. And the site had on it the most wonderful meadows with the greater butterfly orchid growing. And there were so many that we wanted to do a count to say to the council, you can't put a car park here. This has got so many thousand orchids in it. And we had to get other groups to come and help us to do the count. And there were about 2,500 of these orchids there. You can see they're in sort of meadows and they're surrounded by all this spoil, which the trees are growing on. So I don't quite know what influence the spoil had on them. Anyway, it helped preserve Clean Country Park, and now it's very well used by the public, particularly dog walkers. Next slide. Now, this is another culture. Not all the plants that grow on these things are that desirable. So here is the Wallace Monument. It's got the back here, and this is the Alloa Road, and this is the railway line, which also goes to Alloa. And about halfway along here is Manor Palace Colliery, which was an anthracite mine. It supplied Kincardine Power Station, actually. Now, it has a most undesirable plant growing on it. Next slide. Here is an aerial picture, and you can see the River Forth here, and this is the railway line. And all these white dots, next slide, are giant hogweed. And I hope you all know what that looks like. But these white things are the umbrella-like flowers or inflorescences of giant hogweed. There must be thousands of them. Now, this plant, in case you're not familiar with it, if you walk through it or you get the sap on you and you expose your skin to sunlight, you get these enormous blisters. And this poor lad had run into some giant hogweed plants to get his football back. And his body had 3 or 4 of these. It's absolute agony. I wouldn't like to show you the slide actually of him on it. It was very emotional. Anyway, next slide. This is what it looks like on the ground. And we go there really to check that this is not spreading along that railway line to Alloa. But there are rare plants on this site too. Next slide. Now this is evening primrose. This is a garden plant which is spread throughout the area. It's called Potentilla nepalensis, and this is agricole. But there are other plants which are common on Bings, Ficus bugloss, mullein, Riv melodot, are all on this same site. Next slide. Now, before I leave coal workings, there is another sort of flora on coal workings, and that's a fossil flora. Coal is made from fossilized plants from Carboniferous, and we have one of the most famous experts on fossil Carboniferous plants. He lived all his life in Stirling. He went to Stirling High School, he worked as a bank clerk, and then he actually got left money and he became a gentleman scientist all his life. And he added this bit onto this house here, which is his laboratories. Now, knowing about the fossils in coal is important from an economic point of view. If you put a borehole down in one place and you go through a seam of coal, and there's a borehole somewhere else with a seam of coal in, you can prove the two are linked if they've got the same fossils. So that is an economic input. Next slide. But it also was a great academic. This period in the Earth's history saw the evolution of large land plants. Before this, there were algae and there were mosses and littleworts. but they were all small plants because they didn't have a plumbing system to take water from here up to there. So the development of diamond flowering saw the flowering of these giant plants. And they were basically all types of fern, fern allies. There are tree ferns, which we still have, but in those days they used to have tree horsetails, which you can see here. You may have horsetails in your garden if you're unlucky. And speedy and tree lycopods, flood bosses, that you can see here. And so Kidston was in to the period when they were tracing the evolution of plants. Now, he would only found fragments of this tree all over the place, and he had to reassemble these fragments to show what the original whole plant looked like. Well, we shouldn't forget him. His grave is just over the wall of the university there in Logie Kirkyard. And there's nothing in the town named after him. He actually was the first secretary of the predecessor of this organisation, and he remained a member of it throughout his life. So we should have at least a road named after him. Next slide. Now I'm going on now to oil shale bins. If you drive to Edinburgh, you're bound to have seen them. They're these red bins. These are actually pyramidal in shape. And they look absolutely barren. But like most bins, there's lots of plants in them. And this lady, Barbara Harvey, who was a lecturer at Edinburgh University, did a study of them and found 360 species of plants on them. This photograph is taken from another bin, Addywell bin, and that's a Scottish Wildlife Trust nature reserve. They have modern club mosses, which is certainly not 20 or 30 feet high, like the ones in the Carboniferous. Next slide. Now, the only one of these bins in our area was at Philpston. Now, the bins, the oil shale, is mined underground, brought to the surface, and put and heated up in, what do they call it, retorts. They're heated up. This vaporizes the oils from the shale, and it goes out and is condensed into the oil, which they originally used for oil lamps. And what is left after all the oil's extracting is this shale. There's sometimes huge lumps of it, like this thing is enormous rock. Now we went to Philpston bin to look for Young's Haberry, but didn't find it. But what we did find is actually rarer, and that was a lot of these bushes that you see up here are deadly nightshade. Next slide. There it is. It looks tasty, doesn't it? It takes 3 to kill you. Where's the bush? And remarkably rare. Largely, I think, because people have destroyed it because it is so poisonous. Next slide. The shale is taken everywhere. It was used to build up some of the embankments on the new motorway, and sometimes it takes plants with it. And this is a shale embankment at the Skin Flats, the RSPB Skin Flats Reserve. And growing in it is another very rare plant. This is called yellow bird's nest. And it's a parasite, has no chlorophyll in it, so it must be getting its food from somewhere else. And it's a parasite on fungi. Next slide. We paid a visit here earlier in the day. This is the place where the bats were and Aberfoyle slate quarry. Now it's also got interesting plants, but you can see they're not on the whole very big. They're things like mosses and lichens and some quite rare ferns, and this is the parsley fern which is growing up there. Now this is on the west side of the Duke's Pass, which goes across the Trotter. On the east side of the Duke's Pass, next slide, there is a lime quarry, and actually past editor Murray Dickey wrote a booklet about this. This is an inclined railway line which takes the ore from this pit down into Aberfoyle, where it was put into kilns and baked. But we're interested in the plants which grow here. Sorry, this was happening around 1750. The lime, once it's baked, is actually used as fertilizer or for mortar. But actually, I read in Murray's article that it was also used for making white mantelpieces. So rather unusual. Anyway, the plants that we found here, or we go there to count, next one, is the early purple orchid. And this is Pam again. And in 2007, there were 422 plants of that. And when I last went back 2 years ago, there were 184. So there's a decline, but they're still there. Next slide. If you follow that road, the Duke's Pass, right round past Loch Acre, past Loch Venator, you meet the Calendar to Strathire Road. At that corner where all the tourists, well, there's a woman there, isn't there? But the tourists take pictures with a Highland coon. If you look east from there, at the top of the hill, you can see another quarry. And this is Lenny Lime Quarry, another lime quarry. And next slide. It has a pretty rare plant too. This is a plant which has been declining and was put on the red data book this in 2005. And this is a gentian, field gentian. And this is John Snowden up there with me. I haven't been back for a long time, but if somebody fancies going up there with me, I really ought to go. Next slide. Now, the quarry, particularly on Lime Hill at Aberfoyle, is a big quarry. But farmers needed lime to improve the quality of their soils. And the main cost of that lime was in the transportation from these quarry sites. So if you had limestone going across your land, you would do a bit of do-it-yourself lime making. Now this is the river, this is the Bannockburn coming down before it goes into North Third Reservoir. And you can see it has banks of lovely flowers all the way down it. You can perhaps see the lines of rock. Well, one of those lines of rock is actually a limestone. Next slide. And you can find small kilns, the remains of them anyway, in the fields. And we have an article in the Fourth Naturalist by Ken Mackay describing them. But this is the remains of one. Well, the limestone also brings with it plants, and again, it's the early purple orchid, which grew along that seam. When I first started counting them, there were 13, and now we're down to 3. Next one. This is the Warry Burn, and this is the top of Sheriff Muir. So if you go out on the canvas here, up the road and across Sheriff Muir to the Sheriff Muir Inn, this is the Warry Burn coming down here. It's in a gorge which is cut through the rock, and you can see that it's been worked in these crescent-shaped areas. So this was the limestone again, and there are these sort of kilns, primitive kilns up there too. But this had another orchid growing on it, which is the last place, next slide, in the Ochils. I think it's found, or at this end of the Ochils anyway. This is my favourite orchid, that's the early marsh orchid. Again, you can see from this graph that there were 74 there in 2014, and there are only 3 now. Now, strangely, in the Bannockburn, the numbers of the early purple orchid were going down because it's overgrown. In this site, it's the other way around. They've taken the sheep off the hillside, and the vegetation around them is growing them up, overgrowing them, and that's why the numbers are going down. And so it's the removal of sheep which is the problem there. Next slide.
A couple of minutes. Is that okay? Yes.
Sorry?
2 minutes.
Oh, God.
2 minute warning. Yes.
Yeah.
Afraid so. Sorry.
This is a series of 3 limestone quarries here, which was shown to us by John Mitchell. And you can see they're in the line between Kippen and Fintry. And there are 8 sorts of orchids here. I'll quickly show them to you. On this side, we found fragrant orchid, next one. There it is, and you can see what's called cornstone. It's a type of limestone that has to be burned in order to release calcium. Next slide. This is another one of those starred areas, and here there are 5 sorts of orchid in a beautiful meadow, and we're counting here the lesser butterfly orchid, which is much more rarer than the greater butterfly orchid. And the numbers here, 147 down to 57. And then for the third side, this one, this is a black and white picture taken in 1984. These meadows were covered in flowers, and you can see all the sheep up here. Well, they converted all this into a conifer forest. And the SWT persuaded the estate which was doing this conversion to leave this quarry because it had a number of orchids in it, one of which is really rare, and that's the frog orchid. Next slide. The one in the middle here. But it has the field gentian and the fragrant orchid in it too. Now, since the 2000, because there's no sheep grazing this area, we strip it. Next slide. Oh, sorry, that's the area that was left in the forest. You see it there. Next slide. Here we are stripping it, and in the autumn every year we count it, and we managed to keep it going, although the frog orchid has died out at its other 2 sites in our area. Next slide. These are basalt. These are aggregate quarries. This one's a Titicucci. Has nice plants in it. Goldenrod, the British goldenrod, and this is harefoot clover. Next slide. In the base of the quarry, there are ponds, and you also have the water planting. Next slide. Now we come back to the slide which was at the beginning. There is a very dangerous plant growing in here. Next slide. If you look at these rocks, around the bottom of them is green. Let's have the next slide. And that is this plant called piri-piri. A piri-piri was brought in on sheep fleeces from New Zealand. And where they washed the fleeces and the twig, the seeds in here got swept down to what's it?
Lindisfarne.
Lindisfarne, thank you.
It's just I've seen it.
It covered all the sand dunes down there. So if you take a dog there, these things immediately get into its claws and its fur, and the horror stories of dogs having to be shaved. But you can imagine that if they quarried this site, they take not only the birds with it, but also the things that the birds like growing this rock material.
Well, you've overshot the 2 minutes. One minute, can you, if that's okay? It's just in case, to be fair to our last speaker.
Yeah, do it. I'll stop here. It shows you what the road is like. It's being transported out. So I'll leave it there, but I did want to show you something else. So then I'll just show you one slide and you can ask me about it. Down the road, 2 fields down, there's a big experiment going on. And it's taking dust from basalt quarries and spreading it on fields. And the people doing it say that will capture carbon from the atmosphere and convert it into soluble carbonate as the rock weathers, and that this will help with global warming. So we're in the centre of an important experiment. And I'll leave that there, and if it's time when there's questions, tell you all about it. Let's look at the next one. This is
Speaking.
Okay, sorry about the.
Thank you very much. Still lots of lovely pictures that we're not going to see. Sorry to be so brutal, but just to be fair, the time's getting on, and yeah, right, okay. You're using your own laptop, so thank you very much indeed, Roy, and we'll come back to questions after in a little while. Right.